Welcome to the Home Team Sacramento podcast, where we believe that although we may compete in different uniforms, we're all a part of this home team in Sacramento. We all want to see our athletes and our coaches succeed at the highest level, and we want them to live at the highest level as well. So we appreciate you guys being here. As always, you guys can follow us on social media at Home Team Sac, and then obviously all of the social media, all of the streaming platforms and YouTube as well to watch or listen. Today's guest she's just awesome. And I'm one of these days, she's going to say, no, she won't do the podcast anymore because she's going to blow up that big. But today's not that day. Luckily, she was kind enough to join us. Our friend, mental performance coach and speaker, Lauren Nicole Johnson. What's going on, Lauren?
Hey, not a lot. I'm so excited to be here, and never too big for you.
We'll see. I told my wife, I'm like, one of these days, I'm going to say, hey, can you do this? And she's like, no, not now. I'm speaking at like some Tony Robbins event, or I'm hanging out with Gary Vee, or I don't know, hanging out with Eric Thomas. I don't know. Name a motivational speaker. That's what's going to happen one day. But we're gonna savor the moment while we still have it until you blow up, which I feel like is not too far off.
I like your future vision. I'm a big fan of it.
All right, good. So for anybody who's not, maybe not familiar with the podcast that we've done on the Character Combine, or if they're not familiar with who you are, give us a little idea of what your athletic background is, kind of how you came up, and then how you got into the world of performance coaching.
All right. So we'll start from the beginning. I grew up in a sports household, and I played soccer since the age of 5, fell completely in love with it, played all through high school competitively. And then I also played all through college, and I think I fell in love with soccer because it was equally challenging as it was fun. And the way that I kind of got into sports psychology was actually, I kind of fell into it. So it was my third game into my senior year in college, and I received my 5th concussion. And I remember going into our athletic training room, and our neurologist was there, and he had just seen my scans, and he tells me, he's like, Lauren, I can't guarantee the next one won't be permanent. It's not safe for you to play. And I remember, as an athlete, when you grow up and that is your sport. I mean, when people would ask me, oh, tell me about you, first thing I'd say is I'm a soccer player. Like, I identified so closely with my sport and what I did. And I was like, are you sure? Are you sure I can't play? And he said, let me put it to you this way. Do you want to remember your name when you're 40? Mm-hmm. And I was like, man, that's the plan. And he's like, well, then it's not safe to play. Wow. So, man, talk about an identity crisis. I didn't know who I was. I mean, it was a really difficult transition for me, although I knew my health was at stake, and that was more important. And so while I was still on the team, my role just changed. So, excuse me, instead of being on the field, I was on the bench and the best water girl I could be. But I decided to take an elective course, and I found this elective course in sports psychology. Never heard of it before. And I fell completely in love with it. And I think it was because I was the athlete that needed it. I was the athlete that constantly got in my way, that constantly beat myself up and limited myself and needed to be perfect in order to feel worthy. And it was like the course had held up this mirror to me, and I finally saw things as they were. And then it gave me some tools to actually work through them. And instead of feeling helpless, I felt like I had some control in it. And I thought to myself, what kind of player would I have been, athlete and person, if I would have known these things? And then I thought, how many people can I help now that I do? And that's what really started this path down the road of sports psychology. And that's when I decided to go and get my master's degree in performance and sports psychology.
That's really cool. I mean, because I think, let me ask you this before I say I was about to say, because I might be jumping ahead of myself. So obviously there was a little bit of pushback from you with the doctor when the doctor said, hey, if you want to remember your name at 40, this is not the path you want to go. Was there a period of time between that news and like when you started to, I guess, go down that road of sports psychology where you were just kind of just down and not accepting of it? Or was it pretty quick for you? Because I feel like we've talked to athletes that had major injuries or career ending injuries, and there is like this really stormy, rough period where they just like throw their hands up, like, what do I do? And so what was that period like for you?
I had just come back after my fourth concussion. So
Hmm.
it was only my third game back.
Hmm.
And that one was pretty bad as well. I had to get multiple opinions because the first doctor said no, like you can't play anymore.
Hmm.
And I ended up going to a football doctor, which I'm not sure if that was a good thing now that movie Concussion is out.
Yeah.
And he literally looked at the scan for like 2 seconds and was like, "You're good." And so, and now looking back, I'm like, that probably wasn't the best decision. But here I am, a naive college student that all I want to do is play.
Yeah.
So I didn't care. I was like, whoever will say yes to me and clear me, I'm good to go.
Right.
So, I think that I knew it was a little bit inevitable if I got hurt again, which oftentimes puts you in a position to play not to lose instead of playing to win. And I use that analogy a lot in mental performance. But I mean, also in soccer, I think I played a lot more timid, and everybody knows that when you play timid, you end up getting hurt.
Right.
So I think it also contributed to that in that last concussion that I had. Excuse me. And yeah, I definitely went through a period of, I felt kind of numb, if I'm going to be honest with you, because I didn't really know how to feel, because it was such a new feeling to me and a new reality.
Sure.
It took a while for me to become, I guess, accepting of it.
Mm-hmm.
But once I did, and I've always been this way, once I make the decision, I commit to it, because there's nothing, I mean, that's the reality. So let's accept it and let's decide what we're going to do about it. So excuse me, to your point. Yes, I think that there was a period of struggle with my identity. Who am I? What the heck is this? Before I moved on. But I think probably leading up to that, with all the other injuries, I felt like I wouldn't be surprised. I knew what my fate was if I got hurt again.
Right. I love that mentality though, because over the years, I've talked to athletes and coaches. And one of the things that I always find really interesting and I'm really passionate about is you hear all these athletes that, you look at their Twitter bio, you look at their Instagram bios, and it says, they have all their stats, they have their title and all that stuff. You can tell that football, basketball, baseball, softball, whatever, soccer means a ton to them, and they want to go as far as they possibly can. But we all know that like the 1% of the 1% make it to the level of being a professional athlete. And so it feels like sometimes they have this plan A where they're like, if I don't make that, then like, what else do I do? And the reality is you can, even though you can't necessarily compete in the sport that you want to play, you can still be in the sports world. You can do the performance coaching. You can be an athletic trainer. And so I love the part of your story where you're like, hey, I'm a really passionate soccer player. Can't do that anymore. And then you just pivot that same passion into helping people that might be, in a spot where you were when you were younger. And now you can, like you said, add value where maybe you didn't have the knowledge at that point. And I think that's such a cool thing. I think that I hope any coach of young people that are listening to that, like, hear that, because there's always another way. You can still be competitive. You can still be, super passionate about what you're doing, even in the world of sports, even if you're not competing. And I think that's a really cool thing that I think people need to take notes on that.
Yeah. And one of the things that actually helped me was I thought about what things made me a good soccer player. And I thought through those things. I'm like, okay, I am a good teammate. Like I was so motivated by my team and wanting to show up for them.
Mm-hmm.
So, right, I'm a good teammate. I am diligent in my preparation. I had a really good routine. I was the girl. Like I don't say this to brag, because I don't think this is something to brag about, but I mainly say it because I kind of felt like a loser in college. Like I didn't go out. I would be in the gym on Saturdays. I would come home and, be a DD for people on the weekends. I wasn't a big partier. I cared so much about my sport that I was really dedicated. So I went through all the things that made me a good soccer player. Like I'm dedicated, I care, I'm competitive, I'm a good teammate, all those things. And I realized just because soccer was taken away from me didn't mean all those things were.
Mm-hmm.
I was still a good teammate. I was
Yeah.
still very competitive. I was still very diligent and dedicated and detailed. And I thought, okay, I can apply all the things that made me a good soccer player to all the things that I want to be as a mental performance coach.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think also for anybody listening is, what are the things that made you good at what you did? Those things didn't suddenly disappear, but how can you now apply them to what you do now? And I think that was a really, I don't know, it was an interesting realization and almost kind of a calming one at the same time. Cause I'm like, oh, I'm the same person. Like, I think that we mistake that soccer is not who I was. It was what I did. And it was who I was that made me special at what I did.
Yeah.
And so I think for everybody listening, you know, your sport is what you do, but it's not who you are. It's who you are that makes what you do so special.
That's really good. And I like what you said about just wanting to be a good teammate or being a good teammate, because we hear that all the time, especially when you grow up playing sports, like be a good teammate. But it almost, you know, sometimes I think that message gets watered down because it sounds like, you know, support your teammates. And we know, like, for example, I told you I wasn't going to, this is not a question I had, but I told you I wasn't going to go on sidetracks. Here we are. It's going to happen. So it's just in me. But so it was a year or two ago, Barry Zito had a book come out, and I didn't read the book, but I know one of the key things that was highlighted in that book was that in 2010, when he was on the Giants, there was a line in there. Basically, he was rooting against them to win the championship because he wasn't selected to be a part of the postseason squad. That rubbed a ton of people the wrong way. It rubbed a lot of athletes the wrong way. And obviously, I don't know if he got, like I said, I didn't read the book, so I don't know if there was a misquote. I don't know exactly what it was, but obviously that's not being a great teammate in that moment. So I think if we're real about a lot of times when we're athletes, there is a time, I have never rooted against my team, but I know when I was sitting on the bench, sometimes it's like, it's hard to get as excited as you would be if you were actually more a part of the team. So the fact that you, even with this news that you got, and you're like, I still want to find a way to help my teammates. I think that's so awesome and so valuable for people to hear, because like, you really can have a tremendous impact on the people around you, even if you're not playing a lot, or even if you're injured. Like, I think we forget that sometimes. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I love what you said. And I think that I want to expand on that.
Yeah, please.
Is that being a good teammate doesn't mean that you lack the feelings of wanting to be better because you're not out there, or that you're, it doesn't rid you of the feelings of jealousy. It doesn't rid you of the feelings of frustration.
Right.
It doesn't rid you of those feelings. You can be a good teammate and be jealous of the fact that so-and-so got a starting position over you and you think you should have that.
Right.
Because to me, being a good teammate is not necessarily a feeling, it's an action.
Right.
And we can act despite how we feel. You can feel jealous and still show up and cheer on your teammates.
Right.
You can feel frustrated and you can still, do the things that would equal being a good teammate for you. So I think that it's so important. And I love that you said that, because elite athletes, they focus on actions, not feelings. And so even when their feelings don't match how they want to feel in that moment, they still focus on what the actions would be that would make them successful in that moment. And so being a successful teammate, for me being on the bench, there were days where I was pissed because I'm like, I don't even have the ability to play anymore, and you do. And you're treating it like this may not be your last game.
Oof.
And it would piss me off. I'm like, I can't even play anymore, and you're out there and you're lazy.
Right.
You have no idea how much that impacts me, and that would piss me off. But because I had those feelings didn't mean I wasn't going to still support, that I wasn't going to still cheer them on, that I wasn't still hoping my team would win. And so I think that's just an important thing. And I love that you brought that up, because there's a difference between actions and feelings.
Absolutely. And I've always said and you're still going to be competitive. So just because you're not getting the thing that you want doesn't mean, like you said, say you're playing baseball, right? And you're the backup shortstop. Just because you didn't get the starting job doesn't mean that I'm not a competitor anymore, so I'm just going to sit here and just clap because, I kind of give up. No, every day when you show up at practice, you need to push the starter to the very brink, right? Like you need to show up every day and make them prove every single day why they're the starter. You need to like challenge the coach's opinion and make him think, should I really be starting that guy over this guy? Because this guy's putting in a lot of work every single day. But that doesn't mean you can't be, you're like disingenuous. Did I use that? Disingenuous. Yeah. That sounded weird when it came out of my mouth.
That's right.
Not genuine. I got too big with the word. I got too fancy. Not genuine on the bench when you're clapping for him, right? Like it's not an either or thing. Like you're still a competitor, but you can still be a good teammate. Like I don't know. I think that gets lost sometimes. And like you said, I think jealousy is a perfect way to put it. Like that's going to happen. It's going to happen.
How many times I felt jealous when I was injured and I was coming back and I just wasn't the same. I wasn't as strong in the middle and somebody else started over me that was younger than me.
Yeah.
And I thought I had less experience and I know I thought I was better than, but if I'm looking at it now, I'm like, I need to see why my coach made that decision. But man, at the time, you couldn't have talked me out of that.
Right.
I was upset, but of course I still acted in a way that supported my team, even though sometimes my feelings didn't match it.
Yeah. That's great. No, I love that thought. I'm happy I went down that sidetrack. That was a good sidetrack for sure. Let me ask you this. I don't think I've ever asked you this. So when you were playing soccer, who is the person you looked up to? Who is the soccer player that you're like, that is my favorite soccer player? Like who was that person for you?
Mia Hamm and Carly Lloyd.
Oh, Carly Lloyd just retired, right?
Yes.
That was a pretty cool moment for her.
And I'm sorry, I take that back. Although, yes, Carly Lloyd's a part of that. Mia Hamm and Julie Foudy. I'm like, I'm going too far ahead. Carly Lloyd's like, I'm not that much younger than Carly Lloyd. So I'm like, hold on, wait a second. She wasn't even around at that age. But Mia Hamm and Julie Foudy. And then when Carly Lloyd came up, yes, Carly Lloyd was a huge inspiration for me.
Perfect. Okay. I was curious. I don't think I asked that last time. And I don't think I asked this question either last time. So as a performance coach, and I didn't mention this at the beginning, but you were formerly with the New York Yankees as a performance coach there. And so you've been around some of the best athletes in the world. If you could pick, let's just say this, if you could pick an athlete and a coach, past or present, who you could sit down with for an hour and pick their brain and like dissect, basically like have a session with them and just say like, okay, I'm going to dissect your brain and try to figure out what makes you so great. Like what gives you the mindset that you have. Who is one athlete and one coach that you would want to sit down with?
John Wooden.
That's a good one. He comes up often on this podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. So number one, John Wooden. Mm-hmm. I honestly, just because she's top of mind and she was my first, like the first person I ever looked up to, which would be Mia Hamm. Like I would love to sit down with Mia Hamm. Just even the generation she came up in the 90s was so different than it is today.
Sure.
So I would want to ask a ton of those questions. So I would say, just because it's top of mind, I would definitely say probably John Wooden and Mia Hamm.
Those are great options. John Wooden is such a cool. The cool thing about John Wooden is his advice is timeless.
Yes.
Right. It like never changes. Right. The pyramid of success, all of the different quotes he has out there. It's stuff that applies today. And that was however many years ago. But it's like it just still applies. And I think the most successful coaches can apply those things and they're still relevant, which is the amazing thing about John Wooden. I think that's pretty incredible. That's a great choice.
Yeah, his lessons are definitely perennial.
Oh, for sure. For sure. Okay. So since we're talking about like the great minds, when you look at like a coach or an athlete, what would you say is a common trait, whether it's the people that you've worked with or just the people you've observed? What is a common trait that they have that makes them so great, especially when it comes to like the mental side of things? Like, what is it that Michael Jordan, that Kobe, that Michael Phelps, that Tom Brady, any athlete you name, like the greats, like what is one thing, if you had to say, okay, this is probably the one thing they all have in common, what would that one trait be?
They don't feel sorry for themselves.
Ooh, I wasn't expecting that. I like that though. Please expand.
They don't play the victim card.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that I know is like, when we play the victim card, we give up all of our power.
Mm-hmm.
And I think back into times where I played the victim card and maybe wasn't even aware that I was. And I think about, oftentimes it was when my coach made a decision I didn't agree with, or maybe a teammate said something I didn't like, or, whatever it was. I'm trying to think back, and oftentimes I would feel like a victim, like, I can't believe they said that, or I can't believe, you made that decision, or, yada, yada, yada. And the thing is that I spent so much time and energy on things I couldn't control that if I look back and I thought, if I would have actually just exercised what was within my control, I would have probably been happier, probably more impactful and more effective, and probably would have been improved a lot faster. And so I think they just don't feel sorry for themselves. And so when things happen, good or bad, they figure out where their control lies and they spend their mental currency there. They don't waste their mental currency on things that they can't control or that don't matter. And so, one of my favorite exercises of all time, just because when I look at mental performance, if you boil it down, it's being able to accept what you can't control and exercise what you can in any given moment. And so if you can at least create the foundation of getting in the habit of always understanding where your control lies in any given situation, you're going to be able to act with so much more power than without it. And so a great way to do this is just pull out a piece of paper, like fold it in half, and on one half, write all the things that are outside of your control. And on the other, write all the things that you can control, and let that serve as a visual reminder as the thing with where your attention is being placed. And hey, if it's on the not control side, every time that you notice it's out of your control and you go, okay, hold on, I'm going to bring it back to something within my control. That's one bicep curl for your brain. Every time you do that, you're able to transition and notice when you're focusing, when you're dwelling, when you're worrying, when you're frustrated, when you're ruminating on things that you can't control. You get better at quickly switching back to becoming, instead of giving your power away, is taking your power back and doing something about it.
That's interesting. That's really interesting too, because like I mentioned before, and I think the majority of our audience is in the high school world. So, and I don't know how many athletes listen to this, so bear with me, everybody, because I don't want this to come off offensive, but like, I think it's probably well known that in the high school age range, what you just said is not always the easiest for a high school student to understand. So, and which is understandable because of the development of the brain and all that different stuff, experience, different things play into it. But how would a coach, so going off what you're saying, how would a coach relay that to their athletes to help them develop a strong mindset, a strong mental game, while also at the same time understanding and I guess navigating the waters of them being, I mean, they're kids, right? Because I mean, when you were with the Yankees, you're dealing with grown men. Right.
Not
really. Okay.
Not all the time. And I don't mean that like in a derogatory way. Sure. Like we had like actually in the Dominican Republic, like we have very young players.
That's great. Yeah, good point.
We would draft straight out of high school.
Sure.
Draft guys that are 17. So we had some high school level, or like I should say age range, not as common to your point, but some of those age ranges too.
No, absolutely. You're completely, yeah, absolutely. So you would know then, like, how does a coach navigate that? Because it would look a little bit different than if you're working with someone who's 27 in the middle of their career versus a sophomore or junior in high school. Like, it's kind of a big question, but like, how do they navigate those waters, but also at the same time hold them accountable for those things?
Right. So great question. I think that it looks very different, right? I think the way that I'm explaining this, this tool is very simply, right? We're saying, okay, this is what you do, and voila. That's not, I hope it doesn't come off like I'm just like, voila, magic, and you're back in control and you're back in your power. That's not, that's not what I'm saying.
Sure.
But this is a tool and a coping and cognitive mechanism that we can use that actually allows us to maintain a high level of performance, even when circumstances or things around us aren't ideal.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to think of it like any skill. The first time you ride a bike without training wheels, you might fall off several times.
Mm-hmm.
The second time, you may fall off a few or less. And then times after that, you may only fall off once. And then next time you may wobble a little bit, but you catch yourself. And then finally, you learn to catch your balance. And I think that's what these mental skills need to be looked at as well. By giving a mental skill, it doesn't mean suddenly they know how to ride a bike. By offering a mental skill, we have to understand that they're going to fall quite a bit. But the point is not to say you're wrong or you're doing it wrong or don't do it that way. That's actually a part of the process. Mistakes are a part of the process. Not executing perfectly is a part of the process. And a lot of athletes, especially high school athletes that are really talented, sometimes it's a hard process to go through.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where I think coaches can serve as a real support. Is that, hey, it's after you get taken yard, okay?
Yeah.
It's taking you 4 innings to get back on your game. Let's try to do it in 3.5. All right, let's try to do it in 3. All right, next game, let's try to do it in 2. And what we do is we close the gap between where they are and where they want to be. But understanding that it's a journey and no journey is linear. It's going to have ups and downs. And so I think when we look at these skills, I think that's where coaches can really serve as a support and a reminder that you have to put in the reps. You can't have the experience of 1,000 reps without putting in your first. And every time you rinse and repeat and you do it again, that muscle in your mind, that strength, that mental strength gets stronger. And you can't just practice it when you need it. We have to practice it consistently and often. And everybody's journey is just going to look a little different.
That's good. I had the mental bicep curl thing around here somewhere, and I was going to hold it up, and now I can't find it. Of course, it's like it's around here somewhere. I know it is. No, that's really good, and I think it's a really interesting way of looking at it too, because obviously, our goal is obviously we love, like Kevin and I love competition. We've said that so many times on here. It's like we love competition. We love to compete. And so we want coaches and athletes to be competitive. We never want to water down competition. But at the same time, like we believe that you can be a great person. And as a coach, you can teach your athletes how to be great people on and off the field without sacrificing the competitive side of it. But sometimes a coach may hear that and say, okay, so I need to, like when these players, whether I have them for 2 years or 4 years, like I need to make them great people by the end of this time with me. But really, like you said, you're a part of their journey. You're like one of the freeways that they're on for this portion of their journey. And maybe they have like a radical transformation as a person while they're with you. Maybe they just pick up a couple things, and maybe it seems like they learn nothing from you. But then down the road, they remember, oh yeah, coach used to say this. But I feel like that would take a lot of pressure off coaches and assistant coaches, thinking, like you said, we're part of their journey, but we don't expect them to complete their journey while they're here with us. It's like, we just need to make this part of their journey really impactful.
I love that. And
you said, I just regurgitated it. You said it way better than I did.
But I love the way that you put that. And there's one thing I want to add, which is don't underestimate the power of planting a seed. I think you're right. I think a lot of coaches, their goal is to create a field full of flowers. But don't underestimate the power of just planting the seed. You never know when it will be watered and when it will bloom. And so I know for me, there's a lot of lessons that I learned at a young age, but I didn't really understand them until I got older. And now I'm so glad, because I reference those all the time. And so even if it doesn't seem like they're listening, it doesn't seem like it fits, when you're true to yourself and you're true to the desire and the passion to make them a better version of themselves, when that's what's driving you, and you're allowing your values to serve as your compass, you can't go wrong, because you're planting so many seeds along the way.
That's really good. I just want to tell people this too. We love having Lauren on the show, but it's also incredibly difficult for me because I have to go through all this crap and find which clip I want to post. It's horrible. It's like I do it every time. It's like I could pick like 6, but I have to choose like 2 or 3. So it's like it's awesome, but it's also, you know, challenging at the same time. So, and usually like sometimes I'll take notes during the episode. Okay, remind, like timestamp that, you know, mark that. Some people I'm like, I'm not going to do that because there's this, I can pick a place like, and then I have a good clip. So that was awesome. So obviously, you know, with the name Home Team, we are, you know, community centric. We're talking about how we're all part of this thing together. When you live in Sacramento or the surrounding areas, or even maybe you're listening and you live somewhere else, wherever you may be, like that is your home team. So even though we compete against each other, we're all, you know, a part of this. But, you know, again, team is kind of the key word in that whole thing. And so something I heard a little while ago was the speaker was talking about how, you know, if you have say a basketball player, for them to play like the most free they can possibly play in the moment, one of the most beneficial things they can have on their side is a supportive team, supportive coaches, because if there's 5 seconds left in the game and they get the ball and they're expected to take that last shot, if in the back of their mind, like subconsciously, they're thinking, okay, what if my coach thinks this, or what if my other teammates think this? They're not really playing free in the moment. They're thinking about all this other stuff that is going to probably weigh them down and probably affect whether or not they make that shot. But if they fully know all the time, hey, my coaches have my back, they'll push me, challenge me, maybe get in my face sometimes, but they want what's best for me. And same for my teammates. They're the most free in that moment, and they're probably performing at the best. So, like, how, in your opinion, how important is it for teammates and the coaching staff? Like, how important is it for an athlete's development of their mindset? Like, if you have a great, like, people around you, does it make it a lot easier to grow? Or, you know, does that make sense?
Yeah. You're asking about the environment.
Sure. Yeah.
And yeah. I think what you were describing is psychological safety, which is psychological safety is the idea that you feel safe to take risks and make mistakes. You feel safe to make the mistakes that you know lead to growth. It's in those situations where now what that doesn't mean is that you just go out there and you just make dumb decisions because I know I won't get in trouble.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
sure. Well, yeah.
So when you're, to your point, it's, yes, this person wants the best for me, but they want me to grow. And so that's why they push me. That's why they're on me. That's why they have high expectations. But the one thing I understand is that I'm not going to get punished for taking the risk, the right risk that I know is going to make me better. And I do everything in my power. And if I still don't get that result, that's not something that is going to come down on me. And so I think that that's important, is to create an environment that has kind of that growth mindset, right? That growth often comes from being in those really uncomfortable, stretched moments that are outside of our comfort zone, and that we understand that mistakes are part of that growth process. And that if you're constantly making the same mistake, you're not learning. But if you never make new mistakes, you're not growing.
Ooh,
and
that's
so
good.
There's an understanding that has to happen between what mistakes are good mistakes, or are you just not paying attention and not learning from the mistake you just made. And so I think that it's that environment of support that has those high standards, but is also mentally agile, knowing that it's not going to be linear, like we talked about earlier, that there's going to be ebbs and flows, and that's part of the learning process.
So maybe, and this next thing I'm going to say, maybe this applies to what you just said, but I was watching a TV show quite a few years ago, and I remember this mom was talking, it was like one of those like spy thriller type shows. And this mom was asking like, hey, I have one son who, you know, they had the same trauma right? This one son is really struggling and seems to be like broken all the time. This other son turned into this like strong, really mentally tough person. Like, why is that? They grew up in the same household. And I just love the illustration that he uses. Like, well, if you took two like glass, like say 2 glass wine bottles and dropped them from the same height, one might shatter into so many pieces that it's like you can't tell. It's just broken glass, right? And the other one may break, but it might turn into like a handle with a jagged edge. And you could say the one's basically useless. The other one could be used as a weapon. It could cut something. You know what I mean? And so it's just two different responses to the same situation. So I guess what are your thoughts about if someone fails, if an athlete fails in a situation, and what is that thing? It's probably like a super deep answer, but like what is that thing that causes athletes to respond to maybe a similar failure in different ways? Where one, it basically turns into the yips, and they can't figure it out after that, and then the other one is like, to your point, hey, I learned from it. I'm growing from it. I'm not going to make that same mistake again. Like what is that thing that causes people to go kind of at different directions in the fork in the road?
Oftentimes it has to do with their relationship with fear and their relationship with failure. It's kind of like, you think about your spouse or your best friend and why they are so close to you and why you chose to be with that person for the rest of your life is because you have a good relationship with them.
Mm-hmm.
And you have a good relationship with them because you've spent a decent amount of time with them. If you spend time with your failure and you're willing to learn from it, you fear it less. It's kind of like, have you ever been in the grocery store and like seen somebody from high school? And you immediately are like, I don't need ice cream anymore. I'm gonna go to like the vegetable section because I need to get far away. I didn't see them. I'm gonna pretend like they don't exist.
Oh, I've told my wife that before. It's like, hey, we're not getting this food tonight because I saw someone. No, I've been there for sure.
Yeah, right. We've all been there before.
Yeah.
If we treat our failures the same way, how do you expect to develop a relationship with it?
That's good.
So to a lot of athletes that I work with, having a relationship with failure and therefore improving your relationship with fear, because oftentimes they correlate in some way, that's a competitive advantage. Because while somebody is spending all their mental currency on the past, and maybe in an unproductive way, when I say that, like ruminating, beating themselves up, I'm not enough, and they're, almost like giving away their worthiness in some sort of way. Somebody that spends time with it and is willing to look at it instead of just feel it. So meaning they put it on paper. What went wrong? Why? Or maybe I did everything right, but just the result was out of my control and that looked wrong. We have to evaluate what that actually means, because a lot of times, especially in high school, I know I was this way. So I'm saying this, I'm talking about this from experience.
Yeah.
Results were the most important.
Sure.
I wanted to score. I wanted to assist. I wanted to be in the starting lineup. So my question to a lot of people, and one way we can actually help develop our relationship with failure or, with fear, is to define success. Number one, we can define it as a result, which is pretty normal, what most people do. And then number two is define it as something within your control. So what that means is, all right, if the result if it couldn't be scoring for me, what would success be up until that point? And I'm like, okay, for me, that would be making the right runs. That would be playing the right balls, like me knowing what through balls to play. That would be getting open. So what all that equates to is putting myself in a position to have the opportunity to take a shot. Now, whether or not it goes in the goal is kind of out of my control. Once the ball leaves my foot, there's nothing I can do. And so I would segment into two different things. Is the result, did you get the result? Yes or no? Okay. But did you get how are you in terms of the things within your control? So were you successful as you defined it within your control? And so a lot of times what we do is when we separate those two things, we realize that not all good results are the result of good things. Sometimes we do everything wrong, but we get lucky and we still get a good result.
Sure.
We don't want to repeat that because although it worked in that moment, long term, that's not something we want to become habitual in nature because we know that's not going to lead to long-term success. But the flip side is true. Not all bad results are the result of bad things. And so you could do everything right at the plate and still strike out.
Right.
I could do everything right by getting in the right position. I got ready for the head ball and I headed it in and the keeper was there right straight to her hands.
Right.
That could happen. But guess what? I was successful and I did my job, even though I didn't get the result I wanted. And so what I think that does is it helps paint a really clear picture because results won't make you better. Doing the right things will. And oftentimes when you do the right things, we're more likely to see an increase in our results. And so don't just focus on the result itself. And what that does for failure and for a lot of times we equate failure to bad results. Right. What it does is it helps us go, oh, wait a second, I didn't fail, but man, I could have done this better within my control. Or I did everything in my control. There's nothing more I could have done. I'm happy with that. Hopefully next time I can, or hey, next time I'll do this. So what it does is it just gives us a much clearer picture of what we're dealing with versus this black or white version of I'm good, or I'm not, or I won, or I lost. And so that's one of the things I would say that I work on with a lot of my athletes to help them develop a relationship with fear and failure is that the more we're willing to dissect it and we're willing to look at it and evaluate it and learn from it, the less we often fear it.
Yeah, that's really good. Now so kind of pivoting from that. Everything you're saying, it's like, it's very much about the athlete, right? But a coach, I feel like a coach would be even one step further than that, right? Because like take, for example, you're a pitcher. Like you've said before, as soon as you let that ball go, you do everything mechanically right. You pick the right, pitch, you pick the right spot, everything. Once the ball leaves your hands, you can't field the ball. I mean, you can't control your fielders. You can't control the batter. You can't control the umpire. As a coach, you can't even throw the pitch. Like you're literally on the sidelines watching it. As a football coach, you like design a play, but ultimately it's up to your players and how they run it and if they run it properly. So I guess what role? Because I mean, typically when I think of performance coaching and I think of performance development, I think of athletes. How would this stuff apply to a coach? Because I feel like that'd be incredibly difficult. And then also kind of piggyback off of that, how much time should a coach spend on developing the mental side for their athletes?
Well, a lot.
A lot, sure. Yeah, sure.
However, the realistic and what I would suggest to a lot of coaches is that if they're not doing anything on the mental side, start really small.
Okay.
You want to leave athletes wanting more. Not the other way around. So I always start with something really small at a fundamental level. Yeah. And the most important thing is consistency. So you've heard me say this a million times, but consistency over intensity. So instead of meeting in a room for an hour every day to talk about mindset, like start with 5 minutes before practice, but just be consistent with it. Yeah. Because then you can add and grow over time. But all these principles also apply to coaching. Because like what we talked about with John Wooden, a lot of the principles in mental performance are perennial. It's kind of like if you take a book and you translate it into like several different languages, instead of speaking the language of the athlete, we're now speaking the language of the coach. But the principles still apply. And so same thing is the success. What's the result that you want? I mean, man, I work and still work in a very result-driven industry. Results are not the enemy. I feel like sometimes we misinterpret, like, oh, don't focus on your results as that meaning they're not important. The point of saying focus on the process has little to do with the fact that results matter or don't, and everything to do with how to put your brain and your mind in the right position to elicit elite level performance. Because when we're focused so much on the future and the result that we want and things that we ultimately do not have control over, then it impacts our ability to be successful in the present moment. It impacts our ability to focus on what we need to do right now to get that result. And so the best way to actually manage our performance in the moment is not to focus on the result itself, but to focus on the things that actually lead to it. And so it's the same with them as I would want them to know what's the result that you want? What are those okay, great. What does success look like in your control? For a coach, it's not going to look the same as an athlete's. It's going to be making sure that I train my players in the right way. And maybe they have these pillars that go, they need to be in shape. They need to have their skills, whatever it is. They have their things that they believe is going to make them a successful team. And then make sure I create the right lineup, that I make the right decisions in game, that I trust my players in high pressure situations, that I train them for high pressure situations.
Right.
And so that's what their process is going to look totally different, but the result may be very similar. And so what that does is it also kind of separates what we talked about before, which is the things outside of our control and the things within it.
Right.
The things outside of our control when it comes to success oftentimes can be the things that that could be the direction we're going in. They set the direction, but it's not necessarily the thing that we are doing in that moment. Sets the direction, but it's not in the driver's seat.
Yeah.
And so I think that's I hope that made sense. But
100%. 100%.
Shifting to coaching.
Yeah, no, 100%. If that didn't make sense, then there's a lot of stuff I say on this podcast that coaches like, what is he talking about? So I hope that made sense to everybody because it did to me. Okay, so I have two more questions to you for you. Like I was telling Lauren before we started, because she's done a couple of podcasts with us before. She knows I tend to talk a lot. So I'm going to try to keep this one a little tighter for all of you guys who are listening and, and for Lauren's time too. So recently I heard some feedback from a coach and they were talking about different organizations, programs like ours or Positive Coaching Alliance. They didn't call anybody out specifically, but there's different organizations out there, that Character Combine, that do these types of things. And one of the issues, and I thought this was really interesting feedback, because I love getting this type of information because it only helps us, know how to navigate these waters better. But one of the things they said that I had never heard before was sometimes these types of things don't take into consideration the culture in which a coach is coaching in. And I thought that was really interesting because I completely agree with them. I think there's sometimes you have organizations like different organizations, I'll say that, different organizations that have these principles. And it's like, those are great. And in a perfect world, those principles, those 5 steps would work for anybody. But there's also cultural things, economic things that you're going up against as well. And there might be some steps to get to a point where you can actually implement those 5 steps. So when it comes to performance, and if we're looking at it from the coaching perspective, like how do they, I guess it's a big question, but like, how do they navigate those waters? Like, how do they attack this idea of performance coaching and mental performance and developing an athlete's mindset when they're also dealing with maybe some of the cultural things that are kind of going up against that?
Well, number one, it starts with relationships and knowing who your players are.
Yeah.
The reason I love mental performance is because there's no cookie cutter approach. Every person's different. Like I remember one of the players I worked with at the Yankees, he works really fast on the mound. Typically in sports psychology, when people speed up, it's an indication that their stress response is really high. And it can often lead to making quick decisions under pressure, aka not making very good decisions, not thinking through what they're doing.
Sure.
But so if I didn't know this athlete and I saw him pitch for the first time, I might think that, shoot, we need to slow him down. We need to get him in control. But because I spent time and observed, what I learned is that that's actually how he pitches best. And And so if I slow him down, he actually overthinks. He thinks too much.
Yeah.
And so while there might be some great tools out there, you have to be flexible within them, because theory is great, but not everybody fits into one. This is not a control study. This is life. And there are going to be outliers to every single team and every single group of people. And if we are not flexible with our methods, we're going to leave them out.
Yeah.
And so I think number one, you have to know your players well, develop a relationship with them, understand them, and lead with curiosity. One of the gifts I was given at the Yankees was getting to work with so many different cultures.
Yeah.
And I mean, I could sit here and tell you story after story, but oftentimes I would go home and I would just cry to my husband, because I would have these realizations of how different life was for them and how naive I felt to not know that. But at the same time, what a gift it was that they were willing to share it with me.
Yeah.
So I was so thankful for it. And I'm still to this day, I'm so thankful for it. I'm still in touch with many of them to this day. And because I understood where they came from and what they were dealing with, I was able to navigate what might work for them. And I remember there was one player in particular who really struggled with trust for good reason, for some things that happened in his past. And we had a new coach come in working with him, and like he would not even entertain the changes he was asking him to make. And he came very frustrated in my office, like, what's happening? Like, we need to fix this. Like, he's not listening. It's not okay. And he was really frustrated. And I asked him, I said, have you ever asked him about his mother? And he kind of stopped and he's like, what? No, why? I said, well, if you understood his relationship with his mother, you would understand why he doesn't trust you.
Yeah.
He doesn't trust anybody. And you have to earn it in order to have those kinds of conversations with him and be effective. And he was like, wow, I had no idea. So he actually took him out to dinner the next night.
Oh, wow.
He's like, I apologize for not taking the time to understand you. To the degree that you feel comfortable, are you willing to share with me about your background? And suddenly you noticed him open up. And so I think part of it as a coach, from a coach's perspective, is to lead with curiosity, not judgment, but curiosity as to, instead of, what the hell, why aren't you listening to me? Go, hey man, I noticed you're not listening. Is everything okay at home? Same message gets across, but one leads with curiosity and empathy, and the other doesn't. And so if you don't have that relationship with them that can bear that kind of weight of truth, I often recommend that you lead with empathy and you ask better questions to elicit better answers so that you can understand more and navigate those waters with each individual even better.
Yeah. I mean, the athletes they're not chess pieces, right? It probably seems like that sometimes. You just move them around to make your next move and to win the game. But I guess if they felt that way, if they feel like they're just a pawn in this game that you're playing, it would probably be really tough to connect with them. I mean, almost impossible. So yeah, that's incredible.
When athletes feel that you care, most of them will run through a freaking wall for you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's just a really great way of showing it, is taking the time to understand and learn a little bit about them.
And it's not like it takes a ton of time. Like you could be literally like, I mean, you see it all the time. If you have, before baseball practice, right? Sorry, everybody. I played baseball. I sat the bench a lot, but I was on the baseball team. And so a lot of when I go to a sport, it's typically baseball, but like you see it all the time, you're playing catch, right? You're warming up before a game and you have coaches that are walking around talking to their athletes. You're still warming up, you're still practicing, you're still getting ready for the game, but it's a perfect time to just have that simple conversation. So I think it's not like we're sitting down. It's not like you would have a session with an athlete, right? And you're sitting down for an hour in an office. Like coaches, you don't have time for that. I'll say it for you. You don't have time for that, but do it during practice as you're walking from the field to your car. Like all these little things, you can have these conversations. It's not crazy deep, but it's going to have a huge impact on the athletes. So, Yeah, I love that. So we're already past time. I should have known. We're past time. 3 minutes past time. Probably a little bit more because I started my clock late. But let me ask you this one last question.
Yeah.
Obviously, we just want to keep giving value to the home team. By the way, if I'm going to say it for Lauren, she can give all of her information at the very end. But if you have not signed up for her newsletter that comes out every Wednesday, do it, because you can get this content all the time. Like, you can get it every Wednesday. You don't have to listen, you don't have to subscribe to our podcast. You can just get it straight from her. So make sure you do that. But that being said, who do you have, like a podcast, a book that you want to recommend to coaches, athletes, both, that you feel like would be really valuable for them? I'm sure you have. If you're watching this right now, you can see Lauren's face, and she's like going through her entire library. It's probably like hundreds and hundreds of books.
Oh my God, so many.
Yeah, and podcasts. Don't worry, you don't have to say home team podcast. If you want to, you can. But
I love home team podcast. So
thank you so much.
Home team podcast. Number 2.
Perfect.
One of my favorite books, especially at that high school age, because we're learning how to have that relationship with discomfort, have that relationship with fear, and develop a relationship with failure. I mean, it's probably the hardest time to develop it, but also a great time to plant the seed, is the book, The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday. Absolutely love that book.
Yeah.
I really like that one. And then another one, it's great.
I'm sorry. Yeah. He's local though, isn't he?
Ryan Holiday?
Is he from this area?
I have no idea. I think he lives in Texas, but I don't know if he's from here. He might be.
I might be wrong. Okay, please continue. I'm going to look that up. If I may be completely wrong or I'm right. I don't know why Granite Bay is in my head for some reason. I might be thinking of someone else.
Okay. Well, let me know.
Okay. Yeah, I will. Yeah.
The second one I would say is one of my favorite books. And I think it's great because it helps for coaches. It'll be a great way to help develop a really great environment and build like an environment and habits within your team, is Atomic Habits by James Clear. It's always in my top 3 that I recommend. So highly recommend that book. It's a great one. And he also has a fantastic newsletter you can subscribe to. I honestly, that's what I'd say. It's just those 3 are some of my absolute favorites. It's obviously, and I swear I'm not saying this. And I literally, you guys, I just have to say this because Josh will never share this, but I go on a lot of podcasts, and Josh is one of the best interviewers I have ever had the pleasure of being on a podcast with. So I'm not kidding when I say this is one of my favorites.
She's trying to make me cry on the podcast. I'm also a father of 2 little girls, so like the tears happen often. So she's trying to get me, but no, that's very kind of you. I do appreciate that. And like I told you before, I believe you. Because like I said, there's a lot of people that are very nice and they'll say stuff like that, but it's like, okay, I can tell you're just being nice. Lauren, I know, would not do that. So I do appreciate those kind words. It really does mean a lot. I just want to point this out too. If you're not familiar with the Character Combine podcast, there was one of the last ones that you and I did. I made some joke about myself and the Yankees, and you made a comment. You're like, "Oh, the Yankees would be lucky to have you," just like a throwaway line. And like, "Oh, that's fun." My brother, of course, listened to the podcast, and he tweeted it out. He's like, "Okay, dude, like the Yankees." Like, he just got like such a kick out of that. He thought that was the funniest thing, and he just roasted me. So
that's what brothers do, though. That's
I know.
That's how I know he's a good brother, because
he's a good brother.
I have weird vibes about that, but I'm glad that he did, because that's what brothers do.
Yeah. And like, she said all these great things. That's the one thing you took from the podcast. You just wanted to roast me. He's like, of course. And he put it on Twitter. So I was like, well, there we go. But so no, this has been so awesome. I do appreciate your time. Do you want to talk about your event a little bit? I mean, when this posts, it's probably going to be like 2 weeks after it, but you can talk about it if you want.
You can at least say what it is now that you kind of hinted at it. But I'm hosting my first annual Elite by Choice event. It's for mental performance coaches or people interested in the field. And we're bridging the gap between the science of what we do and the art of what we do. Because while the science is really important, it's the art that really makes the impact. So that's it. We're going to have it every single year. And we hope to just continue to bring on incredible speakers and just make it a really it's an intimate setting, only 40 people, no more, so that you can really dive deep into the content, ask tons of questions, and develop relationships with not only attendees, but all the speakers and guests that are there.
Awesome. And so that's kind of go first full circle. If you are an athlete, maybe you're a senior in high school, maybe you're in college, you're listening to this and you're trying to figure out what you want to do. If you want to stay in the world of sports, like, follow Lauren, because she's laying out the blueprint of what she does and how she does it and all these different things that she posts. So if like you're interested in this stuff and you want to help athletes, even though you're not competing next to them, make sure you follow Lauren, because this is going to be, I think, really beneficial stuff to you. So that being said, where can they follow you on social media, website, all those things?
Best place to find all that stuff is at my website, which is laurenjohnsonandco.com, and spelled out ANDCO.com. So laurenjohnsonandco.com, where all my social media is on there. That's where you can check in if you want to work with me, or if you want to subscribe to my newsletter or sign up for my event. So all that stuff you can find in one spot.
Just do it. Just go do it. So Lauren, this was so much fun. Thank you so much. And good luck with your event. I hope it goes amazing. And we will talk to you at some point later. If, like I said, if you don't blow up between now and then, and you refuse to come back. So
thanks so much for having me. Seriously, this is my favorite.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.